Hi there, beautiful mama. So today I would like to talk to you about breaking the waters, or rupturing the membranes, or stripping the membranes. They're the three things it's normally known as. And today's topic really is talking about artificially rupturing the membranes, because that seems to be a very standard practice nowadays that a lot of the medical staff in hospitals will do as a routine practice, really, when a woman is at full term, and either when she's already in labour, so when she's having contractions, or maybe to actually try and induce and start labour if they feel that that's necessary. So, sometimes that may be because the lady has reached 40 weeks and they want to, encourage labour to come along, which is, in my opinion, really unnecessary, because, you can carry to 42 weeks with no problems whatsoever, even 43 weeks. But anyway, this practice is very, very common, and I just wanted to speak about it because, in my opinion, it's one of those protocols that is very, very uncalled for, and actually can end up being quite a violation for mother and baby. Anyway, why does it happen? Why do people think that, artificially breaking the membranes, or stripping the membranes, or breaking the waters is a good idea? Well, there's four main reasons for it. The first and most common reason is to basically increase the intensity of the contractions that the woman is experiencing in order to give birth quicker. It's basically because the medical staff are in a rush to get this baby earthside. The other reasons include things like they may want to monitor the baby, so they break the waters, and then they may put like a probe on the baby's scalp to monitor the heartbeat of the baby, which can actually hurt the baby and leave a scratch, as can rupturing the waters leave a scratch, but fine. Some people may want to monitor the baby's heartbeat. It can also be done if they want to insert a catheter into the birthing mother's vagina, so that they can, and cervix, they can feel the intensity of the contractions. And the last reason, what was the last reason? Oh, it was to see whether there was any meconium in the waters. Meconium is the baby's first stool movement, so some medical people may want to find out if there's meconium in the waters. So they're your four most predominant reasons why it is done. But like I said, the first reason is the main reason, because they want to speed labour up and get those contractions stronger. And it does sometimes work, in fairness to them, because when you break the waters, when they break the waters with a hook, it releases oxytocin, and as we know, oxytocin is the hormone that women need to give birth and to surrender and to let go. That can happen. However, I do feel that I need to say at this point that we can release oxytocin as birthing mothers in other ways also, and often in much more effective ways and in much more gentle ways. For example, just simply turning the lights down, having people around you that are speaking in hushed and respectful tones, being left, privately with yourself and your partner, so you don't feel intimidated or like you're being watched, kissing your partner, other intimate things like tweaking your nipples, all those things, or just a cuddle, will raise your oxytocin levels phenomenally. So there's no need to break the waters to achieve the same result, because breaking the waters can actually be quite distressing and actually can be quite dangerous. So firstly, it can cause tenderness, or it might feel uncomfortable for somebody to break the waters. Secondly, they may scratch the baby's head with the actual hook. That's not uncommon. And then there are more quite fatal complications that can occur from it when the water, or the amniotic fluid I should say, is drained from your body. The cord of the baby, the umbilical cord, can quite often prolapse. which means that it may fall down under the head of the baby so that it's actually positioned between your cervix and the baby's head, which can then kind of put pressure on the cord. And of course, the baby's using this cord as its breathing apparatus, right? Like a scuba diver would be using the thing. The cord is the way that you are able to supply oxygen to your baby. So the last thing you want is for the cord to be compromised and to become trapped between the baby's head and your cervix. So that does happen and has led to emergency C-sections, and sometimes has actually been quite fatal to the baby. So if you don't need to break the waters, and really there is no indication that I can think of really that makes any sense to break the waters, even though I gave you the reasons the medical community will give you, none of those 4 reasons is an emergency, and the waters frankly should be left alone. Now some people think, and it's a common myth, that you can't give birth to a baby unless the waters have broken. Well, I'm here to tell you that's complete rubbish. There are babies born in the amniotic sac. It's called being born en col. It's a French word, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but it's miraculous. It's so wonderful to see a baby born still in the amniotic sac. It's the most magical thing. They actually say that those babies have got special magical spiritual powers when that happens. But not only that, it's only about 10% of women that actually have their waters break, like in the movies. So that's another myth. I always thought that I would know when my labour's starting because my waters would break, they'd gush everywhere, and then immediately the contractions would start and I'd have my baby. Well, no, that happens in 10% of the cases. And it may not even be a gush, it may just be a gentle trickle of waters. It may just be that you find your pants are wet and you're like, oh, did I pee myself? Or is that the waters? The way to tell the difference is basically that the amniotic fluid doesn't smell of ammonia. It doesn't really have a smell at all. If anything, it's kind of a sickly sweet smell, and it's very pale in colour and sort of straw-like in colour, whereas urine is quite obvious, isn't it? You can really smell the urine. So 9 times out of 10, your waters are going to break during labour once your contractions are underway. And with 3 out of my 5 babies, my waters didn't break until minutes before I gave birth. And I was in the water with all of them, and I just felt this like pop and relief, this kind of like, and the babies were born about 2 pushes later. And it's really, again, clever of Mother Nature that this is what usually happens when you give birth, because the actual fluid is there as a protector. The whole reason it's there is for the baby to be protected when it's in your belly. Because I can't tell you the amount of times that I've knocked into things because I forget how big I am. So like just simple things like going to wash the dishes, I'd be like, crashing into it in my belly thinking, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I crashing into everything? But it's because you're not used to being that fat, right? So yeah, it's there as a real protective balloon really for the baby to be cushioned in. And that also is incredibly clever during the birth process, because like I mentioned before, the last thing you want is for the cord to become compressed in any way. So if you've still got the water there, the cord and the baby and everything's really buoyant and it's not being compressed in any way whatsoever. So you don't have to worry about your baby having access to oxygen and being able to breathe well if the amniotic fluid is intact. So that's my main reason for keeping it. I think it's fantastic to not have that fear. The other reason it's there is to keep your baby nice and warm and have temperature control and regulation. It's also really great because the baby obviously has taste buds, and when it's in you, it can taste the amniotic fluid, so it's very aware of basically how you are going to smell and what your kind of taste is going to be. So once the baby's born, the pheromones that the baby will have from the amniotic fluid, and it will be all over the baby as well, obviously, because it's been swimming in it, will mean that you and baby bond incredibly well. So yeah, that's the main purpose of them. So why, what are the dangers of them being ruptured? Well, or of them having broken early. So the risk of infection goes up massively because suddenly you don't have that protective layer there, that water there to stop bacteria or viruses, coming through the vagina into the baby's sacred space. So once your waters have broken, quite often the midwife or your OBGYN will insist that if you haven't gone into labour, like established labour with contractions and everything, within 24 hours of the waters having broken, then they will induce you because they're worried about infection. This happened to me with my third baby. I went for a reflexology session the day before my due date was, which I do every time to make sure that I don't go overdue, because my reflexologist is incredibly talented and she just makes sure that everything has been softened, the cervix is softened and everything's open and ready to go. And on my way home, which was like 8 o'clock in the evening, I just felt that, my pants were a bit wet. And then half an hour later, I was talking to my auntie, we lived in Spain, talking to her over Skype in England. And all of a sudden, I was just like, whoa, I think I've just peed myself or something really weird's happened. And basically my waters are broken, but no contractions started. And this was a brand new situation for me, even though this was my third baby. I was like, oh, what do I do now? Like, I'm not in labour, but my waters are broken. And of course I told my midwife I was planning on having a home birth, and thankfully I did. But she really, that sent her into a panic. She was like, well, we have to get that baby out within 24 hours. And if we don't, then your risk of infection goes up and we'll have to induce you. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Just hold it there, lady. No one's inducing me. That's never going to happen. I'll have another reflexology session. I'll try my best to get the baby out as naturally as I can. But if the baby doesn't want to come out, the baby's not coming out. I'm not doing anything about it. And I had to be really quite firm about that and say, look, this is my risk. It's my baby. It's my body. It's got nothing to do with you. You've told me that there's a risk of infection, but, with respect, I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway. And I said, to be quite honest, the risk of infection is going to go up if you examine me. And she agreed. The risk of infection will invariably go up if they're doing lots of, digital examinations up there. The risk of infection will go up if you have sex once your waters are broken, if you use tampons, so use pads. And the other thing to just be aware of and cautious of, which I'm sure we all are, is just making sure to wipe from front to back if you go to the toilet. But other than that, there shouldn't be really any massive increased risk of infection if your waters are broken naturally, if you're one of those 10%. Because it does happen. Sometimes it happens to women as early as 34 weeks or sometimes before that. And of course, then the medical community don't want the baby to have to hurry out because they know the baby's lungs aren't developed quite yet. And then what they do is they tend to put women on antibiotics to try and prevent any bacterial infection. And they might give you steroids for the baby's lungs to develop quicker. But, I really, really can't justify anyone breaking my waters if that's not what my body has naturally wanted to do on its own, spontaneously. With my first, I was in labour and my waters broke kind of 12 hours into it. And that's quite common for the waters to break within the first 12 hours. But it was just a gentle trickle. There was no real gushing. And that time with my first, there was meconium in my water. So like I mentioned before, that meant that my baby had actually done its first poo in the water, which is common because their bowels are very developed at this stage and that can happen. But though in those days, nearly 11 years ago, it was quite a highly held belief that if a baby pooed, it meant that the baby was in distress. And then it was encouraged that you go to hospital to have the baby just in case the baby breathed in or aspirated any fecal matter when it was, coming through the vaginal or the birth canal. That didn't happen. Luca was born fine and we never even saw the poo. The way you know if there's meconium in your waters, by the way, is because it's slightly green or brown tinged to the water. And I would have just left it. I wouldn't have said anything, to be quite honest, because it wasn't smelling or anything. It was no big deal. But my husband panicked because he wasn't prepared for that, and he told on me. That's how I felt anyway, that he kind of told on me. And my midwife, who was a community midwife, we had a home birth and everything planned. She came over and she was like, right, that means you have to go to hospital. And because he was my first, I did it. My doula at the time did say, you don't have to go to hospital for that, and you can decline, and you can still say you want your home birth. And I wish I had, in a way, because it would have been a lot more just chilled being at home. And I had my water pool and everything. I didn't have that in hospital. But then again, it was a good experience to go into hospital and see what that was all about. But it was quite funny because we hadn't, planned a hospital birth. So we didn't even have a bag packed. We didn't even know where we were going when we got there. Thank goodness my doula was with us and she could show us where we were going. But it was all really unnecessary panic, and I wouldn't do that again. If there was ever meconium in my waters again, I'd just be like, so what? The baby will be born and poo's floating around somewhere. But I mean, the likelihood of the baby inhaling the poo is so minimal. And I've got proof of that from having interviewed various midwives, that they now actually have discounted that as being a huge risk. So there you go. That's it, I think, about breaking the waters artificially. So yeah, top things to remember are, it really isn't necessary. It is a protocol that they do if you don't decline it, basically, just to either induce labour or to make it quicker. Because once you break the waters, oxytocin is released, and it may speed up your contractions, and it may make the labour quicker, which is what they want, to get you in and out quickly. But the risks far outweigh the benefits, in my opinion, because you may risk that the cord is then prolapsing and becomes compromised, and the baby can't breathe, and then you end up with an emergency C-section. And I can't justify monitoring the baby via something that has to be attached to a scalp. And I can't justify needing to measure your contractions with a catheter, because, why? Who cares? So I hope that's been a useful video. I'd love you to leave your comments below and to subscribe to my channel if you found that beneficial. And yeah, thanks for listening, ladies. Lots of love to you and baby bum.